Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to do a brief introduction as we're waiting for a few more people to trickle in. Good morning. My name is Dan Jaffe. I'm an attorney and I'm the CEO of Lawlytics. Welcome to the Introduction to SEO webinar. This is our first webinar of 2016, and we're glad that you could join us. This webinar this week is foundational, and it's a good introduction into the concepts that we're going to be exploring in depth with each passing week. So each week is going to, the webinar series is going to build upon itself. Next week, we have two very important webinars scheduled. One regarding dangerous practices. A lot of it swirls around SEO concepts, or at least concepts that are sold as search engine optimization by some marketing companies. And then next Thursday, we're going to do an introduction to content writing webinar, which is going to go into more of the mechanics of how to create pages that the search engines love and that human visitors, especially potential clients and referral sources, will digest and find compelling. Victoria Blute is going to be presenting today's webinar. Victoria is our community manager, and she's responsible for a lot of our research, a lot of our outreach, and basically keeping the Lawlytics community informed about what's going on in marketing, technology, SEO, and at Lawlytics in general. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Victoria.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. As Dan said, my name is Victoria Blute, and I'm the community manager here at Lawlytics. I keep you guys and Lawlytics in the know about web technology and search engine best practices. So let's dive right into today's webinar. Here's what I'm going to talk about in the introduction to SEO. I'll talk a little bit about how search engines work, because of course this is an introduction to SEO. We need to talk a little bit about search engine history and how they work to make sure that everybody understands search engine fundamentals. At that point, we'll discuss why SEO matters, not only in general, but to your law firm as well. Then we'll talk about some of the more common SEO myths that we've run across so that you can feel more comfortable knowing about what's what when it comes to SEO. Lastly, we'll talk about why it's so important to avoid black hat SEO, and those are the tactics that go against Google's guidelines. So before we get started, there are a couple things that I'd like webinar participants to remember. And one big thing to take away from this entire presentation is that SEO is not rocket science. We may get into some slightly technical aspects of SEO today, but one of the best things that attorneys can make sure one of the best things that attorneys can do to make sure that their website is primed to show up in search results when somebody makes a query is to write high-quality content. And this is a theme that you'll see us return to again and again throughout this presentation, and for a good reason. If you've heard the expression, content is king, there's a reason for that. That comes up a lot. And that's really because what lies at the intersection of what Google wants and what search engine users want, and even what referral sources want, is high quality content. Google's mission statement is to make the world's information organized and to make it universally accessible and useful. And we know that search engine users use Google to do things like shop or entertain themselves. But one major reason that people use search engines is for research. They have questions that they want answered, and they're looking to Google to help them get thorough, accurate answers to those questions. So as we go through this webinar, I'll periodically bring up how high-quality content plays into the other elements in this presentation. But first, let's talk a little bit about how search engines work. Search engines work by finding, gathering, and displaying relevant information to the people who are looking for it. And there are three basic steps here that make up sort of what search engines do in general. The first is that they're crawling the web. Google has bots. They're also sometimes called spiders or crawlers, and those are busy hunting down new information on the web. They follow links from page to page and see what's there. And then Google sorts those pages by content and some other factors. Once Google finds a web page and figures out what's on there, it adds it to its massive index. It's about 100 million gigabytes, so it's very, very large. Google does this so that it can quickly access that information when a search engine user has a question that they can provide relevant information for. And the last step is retrieving that information, and that's what all the crawling and indexing is for in the first place. So at this point, Google gets a question and decides what is the most relevant information that it can give back to that user. It pulls that information from its index and then delivers those pages as search results. So in sum, that's basically how search engines do what they do. Search engines were not always so easy to use. There's a little bit that we need to know about Google's history and how we've gotten to where we are today. So Google started in 1996, and at that time, search engines were primarily keyword-based. Sites were ranked on how many mentions they had on other sites, and how many relevant keywords showed up on a web page. And having all of the world's information stored somewhere was a really great idea. Google had the right idea, but unfortunately there were some problems when it was put into actual use. Google search methods weren't real great in the mid-90s, and that left a lot of room for people who wanted to try to trick the search engine and have web pages ranked highly that probably didn't deserve to be there. And that was really the start of Blackhat search engine optimization. Blackhat SEO was a real problem for search engines because Google's goal is to provide quality websites for those who are looking for them. Unfortunately, because a lot of people want to have their websites returned on the first page of search results, people found ways to trick search engines into ranking low-quality sites highly. And those sorts of practices became a big temptation for companies and businesses who were looking to get their websites on the search engines. This was really a different time for SEO. Black hat search engine optimization providers were filling search engines with nothing but spam. And as a result, with a keyword-based system, you could stuff a website with keywords regardless of what other content you provided or how natural the content sounded and have it rank highly. But that ended up being quite frustrating for search engine users because here they were looking to resolve their problems through search engines, and instead they might find a website that was just full of spam, not full of the answers that they were looking for. And the problem here, too, is that Black Hat SEO at that time was very, very lucrative. These providers were making a lot of money, but Google was getting frustrated because it's not what the company had as a vision for what they wanted to do. They really had set out to help people find answers to their questions. So Google at that time got smarter. And we know that Google employs some very, very bright people, and those people are busy changing Google's algorithms. That's the way that Google decides what is relevant and what is important. And as a result, today, pages are ranked on hundreds of different factors, one of which is the quality of the content that is provided. So Google later introduced some search algorithms like Panda and Penguin into the mix, and these algorithms are busy searching the internet for web spam. Panda was released in 2011, and that algorithm is focused on finding low-quality websites, so ones that have very thin content. They don't offer users a lot of really good information. Penguin was introduced a year later, and that algorithm is busy decreasing the rankings of websites that are in direct violation of Google's Webmaster Guidelines, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But the bottom line here is that Google is getting smarter about spotting content that doesn't do anything for search engine users. And these algorithms are making search engines better. On top of that, Google has recently introduced RankBrain, and that's a piece of AI that is busy learning about the way people naturally use language. And the benefit there is that by understanding how people use language, Google can give searchers better results. So Google really cares about high-quality content because the company sees that its users do too. And that's why Google wants you to make websites for users and not for search engines, as they often say, and their guidelines reflect that. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But as I said earlier, we know that people use search engines to shop and entertain themselves, but their primary goal in using search engines is to find answers to the questions that they have. And this brings up an argument I've seen in regard to SEO, and that argument is this. Basically, what intelligent person would build a search engine that forces websites to follow rules and guidelines in order to be ranked? A smart person would have a system that can crawl and parse anything. It's not deterred by certain kinds of website architecture or coding, and it can return search engine results that are the most relevant results, not the results that have been quote unquote optimized for Google. And I think in a perfect world, this would be great. I think with all the advancements that we've made technologically, people are becoming increasingly impatient as to their expectations for what technology can do. Furthermore, I think the fact that we use search engines so often and we ask Google questions in the way that we would to other humans has potentially led to some of us believing that Google operates like a person. But that is the problem, that Google is not a person. Google is a computer. And that means that we have to deal with the limitations of search engines. Search engines can do a lot, but there is a lot that they can't do too. Search engines all generally operate on the same principles that I've mentioned earlier, but to understand why SEO is important, we can't assume that Google interprets a website in the same way that we do. So let's take a look at an example so we can see where the technical limitations lie. So if you type in California criminal defense attorney into Google, you'll get back some results that probably look like this. If you click on that link, you will be taken to this law firm's website. On the left is what you see when you click that link. You see a nice website. The design, the layout, the navigation, the interactive elements all add to what you as a person experience when you visit that website. On the right is the same website, but this is what Google sort of quote-unquote sees as it crawls the web. This is the sort of information that Google stores within its massive databases. Google understands websites in terms of the coding and the written content that exists on them. And a little later we'll talk about some of the coding aspects that help with SEO. But for now, it's worth knowing that SEO is valuable because in order for your website to be properly understood by search engines and thus being given as a result for search engine users when they ask relevant questions, it's important to speak Google's language, and SEO can help your website do that. As I said earlier, Google crawls the web looking for new information, but it can only return rather relevant results if those results contain information that Google understands. And that's where problems sometimes will crop up with crawling and indexing. We'll talk about those technical elements shortly, but one thing that can make a difference in this area is content. So whether the content is thin or not posted regularly enough, or there are non-text content elements or duplicate content, content really plays a big part in interacting with search engines because that's what Google is looking for. So we know that that quality content matters to search engines, and we should talk a little bit about what defines quality content. Quality content is important, it's useful, it's insightful, and it's trustworthy. It gives people thorough answers to their questions. They can use that information to make decisions about the future. They learn something new by reading it, and they should be able to trust that the person providing that information is an authority. Content does all of these things and over time can help your website attract the right sort of traffic. I said earlier that Google determines ranking based on hundreds of factors, but one way that Google determines the relevancy of the content provided on a website is sort of by seeing what others are doing with that information. When others share links and talk about website content, Google pays attention to that. People are interested in quality content, and the more interested people are in what you are writing, the more likely they are to engage with you. And quality content can help people determine that they can trust you and ultimately that they want to hire your firm over many others. We've established why search engine optimization matters and how important content is, but what exactly do lawyers need to know about SEO in order to use it to the benefit of their law firm? We've talked a little bit about how Google understands things from a coding perspective, and that has to do with HTML. That's hypertext markup language. And that's the language that's used to describe web documents. HTML provides all of the building blocks required to make web pages and give them structure. It formats plain text and sort of gives web functionality. And some aspects of how we communicate things with Google have to do with that. For one, let's talk about title tags. So this is a suggested title for your page in the search engine results. And note that I say suggested because search engines aren't obligated to display the page with the title that you've provided. But a good title tag contains keywords that are relevant to a searcher's query and to the content featured on your web page. A good title tag can help your law firm website rank highly for targeted searches, as well as impacting the rate at which potential clients click through to visit a law firm's website or blog. Another thing to bring up is the meta description. How would you describe the content of your web page? A meta description is a short representation of what your web page is about. And just like title tags, meta descriptions are automatically populated by search engines. However, this is also a chance for you to tell search engines about what your web page is about. And the descriptions need to be an accurate representation of what's actually on the page, but it allows you to indicate what the key concepts of your page are. And the description is called meta description because it refers to itself. It's not part of the page, but it does tell search engines what the page is about. It describes what the page describes, if you will. And that said, each meta description should be unique to the page that it describes. If you've run across the word meta keyword before, keep in mind that meta description and meta keywords aren't the same thing. Meta keywords were used years ago, and they'll come up a little later in this webinar, but they've stopped being a relevant feature of how search engines rank pages. One more thing that I wanted to talk about are headers. Headers are another important feature of web page anatomy. They sort of give the hierarchical structure to the importance of your content. For example, search engines will determine that whatever falls under a primary header, H1, is likely more important than what appears on a secondary header, H2, and so forth. But there aren't just two levels of headers. Web pages can have several headers between 4 and 6 levels, and they're all sort of nested in ascending order. Headers don't only serve as indicators to search engines about what content should be emphasized, but they also serve as visual markers for readers to help guide them through the content. And your goal is really to make that content as easy to understand as possible. So some other SEO vocabulary that you might run across are perhaps things you don't want to do. Keyword stuffing. Keyword stuffing is an outdated practice, and lawyers will want to avoid it as a practice on the web, but we've included it here because there are SEO providers who still choose to do it. Keyword stuffing is the practice of filling a web page with keywords and trying to trick search engines into giving a website a higher search engine rating, and it's fairly easy to spot. Keyword stuffing often appears as part of a list or a group, or keywords appear so many times in a paragraph that it just sounds totally unnatural. If you wanted to hear an example paragraph that involves keyword stuffing, let's talk about one that has keyword stuffing in it. Here's a paragraph about keyword stuffing. Keyword stuffing is an outdated practice. Lawyers will want to avoid keyword stuffing. There are still SEO providers who do keyword stuffing. If you start to see how unnatural this sounds, it's because it does sound unnatural and it doesn't help you achieve your goals on the web. Another way that Another SEO vocabulary word that might come up is hidden text. Hidden text is a deceptive practice that's sort of a variation on keyword stuffing, and it might be even more outdated than keyword stuffing itself. Here's how it works. SEO providers would add a bunch of keywords and key phrases into a web page in the same color as the web page itself. So website visitors couldn't see this text, but search engines could. However, with today's search engines that are much more advanced than before, this is really a practice that should be avoided. Search engines are too smart for this kind of trickery, and they'll accordingly demote websites who decide to use it. So, things that affect law firm SEO. There are some architecture issues too. Is your website crawlable? Does it have a lot of duplicate content? Site speed is something that Google doesn't use as a ranking factor, but again, we don't want to frustrate website users, so your website should load quickly. Um, Also, another thing that is worth discussing is mobile compatibility. We now live in a time where more people than ever are using mobile devices to access the web, and so we want to make sure that websites are responsively designed, and that means that they will adjust to the device in which they're being used. So perhaps if you're reading a website on a tablet or a mobile phone, the images are properly sized, the text is easily readable, the navigation works, and perhaps as a shameless plug to Lawlytics in this moment, all of our websites are responsively designed, so that is something that lawyers do not have to give too much thought to here. They can really focus their time on writing high quality content. Let's move ahead here and talk about Google's basic principles. Google's guidelines really reflect what I've been talking about here before: the design aspects, the technical aspects, the quality aspects. Um, People expect to be able to read websites from whatever sort of device that they're using them on. They expect that they are easy to navigate, and they expect that the content is easy to digest and use. So another thing worth discussing here when it comes to search engines is organic results versus paid results. What are these? So organic results are those that when a search engine user has a question and types it into Google, the organic results come up because of how relevant they are to the search terms being used, and how relevant that content is to the search engine user. In opposition to that, we have the paid result. They're basically advertisements, and it's not unusual to see these grouped at the top of search engine pages or vertically on the right side. And we'll talk about some myths that include paid results in a second. But one thing I think is particularly of interest when we talk about organic results versus paid results is ad blindness. Here we have a picture of what is described as Google's golden triangle. And this is worth talking about when we talk about the intelligence not only of search engines, but also of potential clients. I think there's sort of a myth that search engines are dumb and so are clients, and this is simply not true. Potential clients really ask all sorts of interesting, complex questions to Google, and they often know an ad when they see one. And so this is where Google's golden triangle comes into play. This is the way, for the last decade, that people have typically scanned search results. This picture is a heat map of what that looks like, and you can see here that what used to get attention was in that little triangular spot in the upper left-hand corner. What's interesting is that over the last 10 years, with the advancement not only of search engines, but how people read information and the devices that they're using to access that information, that really has changed. This is now not Google's golden triangle, but what we're seeing instead is a model that suggests that people are doing a lot more vertical scanning, and that is likely the result of exposure to mobile devices. People are habitually conditioned now to scan vertically more than horizontally because they're really looking for the fastest path to the desired content. People are also spending less time viewing each single search result. In 2005, it was just under 2 seconds that a person would spend per search result. People are now spending just shy of, or rather, just slightly more than a second for each listing. So let's move ahead here. On the list of things not to do with SEO, keyword stuffing, like we talked about before. This is a really outdated practice. It's not a great choice. Google is very good at spotting these sorts of things quickly and will demote your website appropriately. Buying and selling links are another problematic issue because the buying and selling of links, as we talked about earlier, Google makes some decisions about relevance based on links within your website and links to other websites. And if you're buying and selling links in order to increase the quantity of links that you have, Google may become suspicious of this. Especially, too, you don't want to be engaging in buying and selling links with other spammy websites. Another issue is duplicate content. So I said earlier that Google's goal is to really hunt the web for new content all the time. It's looking every day for new information. And if it finds duplicate content, you're not adding anything new there. It's not anything that Google can make use of. So you want to make sure that all of your content is not only your own and unique, but that you're not duplicating content on pages. Seeking out any quick fix to improve your traffic or rankings is probably not going to end well. As I've said before, we're really in a time where search engines are getting continuously smarter, and with the addition of new algorithms and machine learning, any sort of underhanded strategy to try to get ahead in the rankings or gain more traffic, for any short-term benefit that you might get from that, the long-term results are really not great. Lastly, unique content versus having a unique website. I think it can be a temptation for people who are building websites to use a lot of bells and whistles and have something that's really flashy. Well, unfortunately, again, Google can only do so much, and if there are elements of your website that really involve those bells and whistles in a way that Google can't understand, that is not going to do much in the way of SEO. Additionally, it may frustrate users if there's too much happening, so to speak, on your website. And that's why creating unique content, again, is really a valuable part of this, that having content that is really your own analysis and your own take on things and really answers questions that potential clients have will really do wonders to help boost your business and make sure that potential clients are interested in engaging with you. So now let's talk a little bit about search engine myths. I brought this up earlier, and here it is again, the keyword meta tag. The meta tags are used to provide search engines with information about your site, and you can find them in a header, and they're not visible to people. However, Google doesn't recognize meta keyword tags for good reason, and that reason is that they've been abused too much. That allows webmasters to add whatever text that they wanted without ensuring that it's actually relevant to the website. And the goal here, of course, is not to be misleading. There's an exception, in fact, for Google News. You'll see news underscored keywords, but Google News is held to a higher standard. They expect that publishers aren't going to abuse keyword tags. Because of how search engines used to work, the quantity of keywords found on a website used to be really important. And that's how Blackhat SEO providers did so well. They'd just fill websites with keywords over and over, and even if the prose sounded totally unnatural, the website would rank highly. And again, as I said earlier, Google is far too sophisticated for this at this point. The best thing that lawyers can do to really help their website is to write high-quality, focused content that addresses questions. And when you do that, you'll see that keywords naturally find their way into the text in the right places. It doesn't have to be a calculated effort on your part. Submitting your website to Google. If anyone has told you that you must submit your site to Google, this again is outdated. Google is busy crawling the web all the time for new information because that's the whole point. It wants as much information as possible to work with so that it can offer users the best results. Google will find your website, but you want to make sure that what it finds is of the highest quality. And the last point I wanted to make is about paid search helping organic results. And this is really a big myth. I read an article recently in which the author said that in his time studying SEO, he's never once seen a company, no matter how many thousands of dollars that they poured into advertising, get any sort of distinct advantage in their rankings from doing so. No amount of money has given them special access to Google or some sort of special consideration. And again, this is really where content counts. In our experience here at Lawlytics, we have definitely seen positive change among law firms who have committed to writing high quality, relevant, easy to digest content on their websites and blogs and add to them on a regular basis. So, in the reasons to avoid Black Hat SEO tactics, just to really drive this home, Black Hat SEO at this point requires a lot of effort. And not only are search engines getting smarter, but they have legitimate financial incentive to keep an eye on people who are doing this kind of stuff, because search engine users get fed up. I read a story recently about a former Black Hat SEO practitioner who spent his time adding spam to the internet to the tune of 45 million words a day. And he made a ton of money doing it because at the time it was very lucrative and search engines weren't that smart yet. But as soon as Google realized what was happening, not only did his business plan fall apart, but when he tried a few other schemes, he eventually conceded that not only were search engines too smart for that the sort of effort that he was putting in, but also that what he was doing was simply wrong. And that brings me to my last point here, in that could you tell Google about what you're doing? So, as I said, any short-term benefit you might get from engaging in Black Hat SEO tactics, not worth the long-term results. Therefore, if you do decide to engage in a practice that makes you ask yourself whether you could sit down with a Google employee and tell them what you're doing, you really may want to reconsider that strategy. So, in a perfect world, no one would do these sorts of things, but accidents do happen. One of the biggest reasons to avoid Black Hat SEO, other than the fact that it's unlikely to work in the long run and tends not to benefit anyone, is the fact that it's up to Google whether they include you in their search results. As I heard it put, inclusion is a privilege, not a right. Kind of like that idea of no shirt, no shoes, no service. It's really up to the company's discretion as to whether they include your website. And that's why lawyers will want to stay well on the side of following Google's guidelines. And again, one of the best and easiest ways to do that, more than knowing a bunch of technical aspects about SEO, is writing high quality content. So you should be sure that you're up to date with Google's guidelines. They've recently printed a 160-page PDF released to the public now with their search quality guidelines. So it may be of interest to you to peruse it. We've said here that the goal is to stay on the right side of Google's rules, but again, accidents happen. What happens if you run into a situation where your website has taken a hit as a result of a Google violation? Maybe it was something you did, maybe you've hired someone to do your SEO. One thing that lawyers can do is do a website audit to figure out where the problem is. You'll want to make a list of anyone who has worked on your website if it wasn't you, and any changes that have been made, so you can figure out what the issue is. And there's good reason to do a website audit if you're feeling unsure about where you stand. Google will soon be releasing an update to their Penguin algorithm, and this one is expected to work in real time. What does that mean for lawyers? So Penguin is designed to be hunting around for spammy websites, and with the real-time aspect, that means websites in violation of Google's rules may see very quickly their websites being demoted. And that said, websites who are following Google's guidelines may see rewards and better rankings and traffic. Now, for those who have made mistakes, there may be hope here. There is suggestion that the real-time aspect of Penguin will help websites in violation of the rules who fix those problems bounce back a little sooner. So, in summary, and I hope lawyers walk away from this webinar feeling this way, that SEO really is not rocket science. More than any other technical aspect that you can learn, writing high-quality content will put you in a position that is favorable to your business, that's favorable to search engines, search engine users, and so forth. Really, that is one of the more valuable things that you can do. People have answers. They are looking to search engines to find answers to those questions. And if you're writing focused, high-quality content, your website may be the one that has the answers that people are looking for. So at this time, we'd like to open up the floor for Q&A. You can submit your questions via the GoToWebinar control panel, and Lawlytics CEO and attorney Dan Jaffe will be joining me to answer your questions. Dan?
Hi, Tori. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Well, several questions came in while you were doing your presentation. And so what I'll do, since I've already got those organized, is I'll start going through them. So the first question that came in is, how do I use the headers that Victoria mentioned? And with this, I'm assuming that the question refers to the hierarchy of content on the page and using H1, H2, and so forth. That is a topic that we are going to cover in pretty excruciating detail. Excuse the word excruciating, but it's something that really warrants examination next Thursday in our Introduction to Content Creation webinar. That's going to be at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we will send out a notice along with a link to register for that webinar in our newsletter tomorrow. And so the answer to that question is beyond the scope of this webinar, which is more introductory in nature. The next question is, how do we make the site crawlable? And that came in when Tori was talking about that part. There's a lot of things that go into making a site crawlable, from the way that the information is organized, to the way that the navigation is laid out, to the way that the links go from one page to another. That is also something that we will be looking at in a little bit of detail next Thursday, but in other webinars as we go through the next coming months. There's also a built-in feature of Lawlytics, and it's a fairly common feature of other platforms as well, called an XML sitemap. And what that does is, when properly updated, it will tell the search engines, including Google, what pages you want them to take a look at. And it will also tell them when the pages were either added or updated, so that as the search engines look at that sitemap, they can see, has this been added or has it changed since the last time that Google came back. Just for everybody here, I'm going to take this out of order. A question came in about whether this is being recorded. Yes, all of our webinars are recorded, and we make them available on our website. Typically, it takes about a week or so for them to become available, and we will always send out notice via our newsletter or one of our webinar announcements. You'll also have access to the slideshow, as well as any supplementary materials that we'll publish along with this, which we often do. Next question is, how do I know if my site is mobile friendly? The easiest way is to just look at it on your smartphone. You can also do what I like to call a browser test on a desktop. You can just grab one of the vertical sides of your browser and drag it down to about cell phone width. And if the site is responsive, then you know it's going to be mobile friendly. If it's not responsive, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not mobile friendly by Google's definition, but you probably ought to have a responsive website in this day and age, because it is the preferred method, for a number of reasons, but because it displays all of your content on pretty much any device and makes it look pretty uniform throughout. Next question is, do you recommend paid Google ads? It's kind of a loaded question, in that it really depends on the circumstances of the firm. We look at Google ads and other disposable ads where you pay once, and once somebody completes the action that you've paid for, that money is gone, regardless of whether it converts into revenue or not. We look at that as sometimes a necessary interim measure, but what we really like to encourage is the investment in content and long-term organic strategies, because if you spend, let's say, $200 on a click versus $200 creating a piece of content, one click, regardless of whether it's a legitimate potential client or not, and that $200 is gone if you've bought an ad. Whereas if you've created a piece of content that's useful, that piece of content will continue to attract visitors perpetually. And so if you have questions about whether you ought to be doing paid advertising and to what extent you might want to engage in that, feel free to contact us, and somebody here can take a look at what you're doing, what your goals are, where your website is at, and make some recommendations to you. Um, Let me just look. There's several other questions that came in while I'm reading from this other list. Um, how many links should we shoot for each month is the question, and that also is somewhat of a loaded question. You really, if you're talking about links coming into your site, which is one of the signals that Google looks for, it's kind of like saying how many positive recommendations should we shoot for each month. It's kind of, if done honestly and the way that Google wants it done, um, it's something that is largely out of your control. And so if you're hiring a company that's going to add, say, 2 links or 10 links a month, and it's kind of predictable, you're paying for it, you're asking for trouble. Links are things that should be earned, and they get earned very easily when you create and share high quality content that's useful to people. People love sharing things that they've enjoyed reading and they get value out of. And if things don't have at least some form of either subjective or objective value, and they are getting links to them, it's pretty easy to figure out that those links were procured unnaturally. So I wouldn't recommend setting any kind of quota. Um, Next question is how do I make Google find my pages faster? And this, if I'm remembering correctly, came in when Tori was talking about it's no longer necessary to submit sites or pages to the search engines. And what we found is that by having a sitemap like Lawlytics has built in that automatically updates, that takes care of the crawlability issue. The more frequently you add content to your site, the more frequently Google will come back and look at the site. And so, for example, if you have a site that hasn't been updated in months and months and months, it's unrealistic to expect that Google will be back very often, because there's nothing to indicate that they should expect anything new. If you're updating your site several times a day, though, or even every day, or even 5 days a week, it's highly likely that you'll see Google there more often than once a day. And we have some customers where we see Google crawling their site literally every couple minutes, as in it's almost always there and never not looking at their site for new content. And so the idea is don't worry about what Google's doing. Worry about what you're doing, and if you're doing the right things, which is creating high quality content on a regular basis, then, and you've got the built-in sitemap, then your site should get crawled fairly quickly. Next question is it okay to post videos in multiple places, YouTube videos, Wistia, etc., or would this be considered duplicate content? We see forms of media such as videos, pictures, and audio recordings, infographics, and so forth, as different from the written content on your site. And there is an advantage that we see to posting it in multiple places. Certainly, you want it on your website so people don't have to leave your website to see it. But for example, you could post your video on YouTube or Wistia or Vimeo or any of the other video hosting providers, and also embed that same video into your website, whether it's a Lawlytics site or any other website. You could also have it on multiple places and use the Lawlytics video encoder and have Lawlytics serve the video up, and that would be just fine. Those are different channels of information, and I look at those as more social channels than anything else. And so, for example, you could post the same information on Facebook Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And the idea is to make people aware of your firm and to drive people back from whatever the outside place is to your website. Of course, there's ways to abuse that. You could abuse the description area in YouTube or in Vimeo to the point where if you're pasting the same content in there in words that's on your website, it could cause problems. Going through, I don't know, Tori, if you've seen any other questions that. Okay, here's another one regarding duplicate content. Question regarding duplicate content. Is it okay to publish a blog article on more than one site, such as my Facebook site, LinkedIn site, Google, etc., or is that considered duplicating content? Yeah, so there's a nuance here. If you're by article, you're talking about actually written content, do not publish it on more than one place in the exact form. What we think is the best practice is to write the most substantive content on your own website, because that's a resource that you own and control. So let's say you have 1,000 words that you've written about a legislative update on your Lawlytics site's blog. So that's a place that you own, control. You want people there. You've got them as a captive audience once they go back there. Well, you could then go to LinkedIn and you could either publish an introductory paragraph about it, a synopsis, some additional information, or better yet, some questions about it. Say, we just posted this in which we discussed the pros and cons of this legislation. We see this as X, Y, and Z. What do you think? Have you had any experience with that? That might be a question that you pose to a fellow attorney on LinkedIn. You might say, something a little more basic on Facebook, like, will this law affect your ability to X, Y, and Z? Twitter, obviously, at least as of now, you're limited to 140 characters, so you might ask a quick question about it or make a quick statement and then lead people back to your blog. So you get people in a place where they're not exposed to your competitors and they can absorb other resources that belong to you.
And Dan, on that note as well, regarding publishing articles to social media, I did read recently that Facebook has made a deal with Google in order to allow Google to index some stuff that was previously not indexable by Google, and that has to do with public posts. So it may be an advantage to lawyers who are posting links to their blog on their website to make those posts public in order to maximize visibility.
Very good point. So let's see, there's another question here, and this is a long one, so I'm just going to read it verbatim to make sure that I encapsulate everything. I've been told that organic results are locally oriented. So if someone in Omaha types in, quote unquote, criminal lawyer, they'll get results for criminal lawyers in Omaha. But what if you have a mergers and acquisition practice that is national? How do you reach a national audience? Yeah, and that is absolutely true. If somebody is searching for a general term such as mergers and acquisition lawyer in any given city, they're likely to get results that are more heavily weighted towards local practices. Assuming that you have a practice that is national in scope, but you don't have a presence in individual local locations. So you've got in this example, you've got a national business practice that doesn't depend on you being locally present anywhere. There's a number of different ways to do it. Beyond having a physical presence in each state, if you talk about local issues in individual areas, that can really help. So let's say you're in Omaha, but you're doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions in New York, or you're dealing with Delaware domiciled corporations or anything like that. Talking about the rules in those states, mentioning those states specifically in articles, and having a site that has a depth of resources and information about individual locations can make a huge difference. In our content department, when they do projects that are national in scope for our customers, they run into this issue that there may not be a local presence. And the way that we've handled it quite successfully is to have information sorted out either on a state or on a city basis, typically depending on what is most relevant to the practice. And then if the individual can drill down from there, it can be really helpful. Now, keep in mind that for a practice such as a mergers and acquisitions practice, it's less likely that somebody is going to type in a local keyword or even be searching for a lawyer specifically on Google or other search engines versus searching for certain answers. So, they may come up with a question. I have a term sheet and it says this on this. What does this term mean? What will my tax implications be if I do an asset acquisition versus an entity acquisition? Whatever the case may be. And since those answers are not typically local in nature, you don't necessarily need to have the word Omaha in there at all, because if somebody is searching for an answer to those more nuanced questions that you would be answering in a national scoped practice, it's much more likely that your high quality content that really explains it is going to prevail in the search engine results over somebody that says, I'm a local Omaha mergers and acquisitions attorney. Come see me for all your local Omaha mergers and acquisitions and business practice needs, something like that. And so it's really just a matter of if you build that information and answer the questions that people are actually asking on there, especially for a practice like an M&A practice, you're going to have the ability to not only reach people on a local level, but also influence influencers. So attorneys that might have, say, done something simple like a trademark or an entity formation might start following you, and then they would be the person that thinks of you when they get the call. Hey, Attorney Bob, remember 4 years ago when you formed that entity for me? Well, I've got this term sheet now. What do I do? And then they turn to you because they've looked up information and they see that you have answers to those types of questions. Let me next question is looking for a general rule of thumb on how often to post a blog article. 1 per week, 1 to 2 per week, every other day, just looking for a goal to shoot for. Well, that really depends on your market. It depends on your practice area, and it depends on what you want to do. I would say at a minimum, if you're a solo practitioner and you've got a practice that you're not really looking to grow so much, but you want to maintain, I would shoot for at least a minimum of 1 blog post or other content piece that goes into your website per week. But what we found is a lot of people will start small, and I would recommend starting small if you're doing it yourself so that you can get used to it and build up. It's something that if you go out of the gates too strong, too fast, you can easily get burned out on it, and it's better to have the slower sustained effort over time rather than a quick burst and then nothing or a steep drop off. But you might find that doing it once a week starts producing some business. It can be kind of addicting once you see the rewards. And if you have enough to say where you can blog 2 times per week or even every other day, it's definitely something where the more you blog, the better. And statistics have shown that as you approach upwards of 10 blog posts a month, there is an appreciable increase in interest and inquiries. things. And so, with that in mind, it's, really it just depends on your practice, and I would experiment with it. Let's see, I've taken some of these questions now out of order, so let me just go through the rest of these. Tori, do you see any others that you have available to answer?
I do not see any that you have not answered yet, but to add to the last question as well, lawyers may find it helpful. We recently did a content planning clinic that is up on our blog site. So if you're looking for a little structure in terms of being ready when you write a blog post, knowing what you're going to write, knowing what that content is going to look like, that may be of interest for lawyers to check out. Additionally, I know that even with 15 or 30 minutes, you can do a surprising amount of work. So if you can, set aside a little moment for yourself, whether that's 15, 20, 30 minutes a day when you have it, to dedicate solely to writing if you're really looking to build up your content. You would really be surprised at the amount of work that can get done over time if you don't, overwhelm yourself, if you give yourself little tiny manageable goals there. And over time, that really builds up to what Dan might describe as a content 401k, that it's an asset that really builds upon itself.
There is one final question that came in, and then we're all out, at least from what I can see here. The question is, what is the best way to get a law firm with multiple offices ranked on Google? Well, the best way is to always have a flow of content going in, but let's say you've got multiple physical offices that you can actually associate with a Google business account. You're going to want to claim those offices. If you're a Lawlytics customer, you can use the Lawlytics Office Manager feature to add those offices. It will automatically create a map that has all of your offices on the map, as well as individual pages for each of those offices. And we found that firms that link to their individual office pages have a lot of success with not only getting found in the organic results, but also in the Google Map listings as well. And so it's a matter of making sure that you claim those listings, and in order to claim them, you'll have to be able to get mail at each of the multiple offices. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions that have come in. Thank you all for joining us today. Look for our newsletter tomorrow. That will contain links to register for both of our webinars that are scheduled for next week. Again, the Dangerous Practices webinar is at 10 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesday the 13th, and the Introduction to Content Writing is going to be that Thursday the 14th, also at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We will send out links to be able to watch this webinar, as well as download the resources from this webinar, either tomorrow if we really get our act together quickly, or sometime next week whenever it's posted online. Thanks for attending.